Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name is Swarnim Wagle from the UNDP Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific in New York, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this side event at the High-Level Political Forum for Sustainable Development. The title of our session is Responding to the COVID-19 Pandemic, Leaving No Country Behind. We have a very distinguished panel of speakers. Ms. Armida Alice-Jabana, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP in Bangkok. Mr. Bambang Susantono, the Vice President of the Asian Development Bank in Manila. Ms. Kandi Wignaraza, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific of UNDP in New York. Ms. Tina Zabin, Investment Advisor, Startup Bangladesh Limited, and Ms. Jyotsana Mohan, who is the Regional Coordinator of the Asia Development Alliance, a regional civil society platform for national CSOs across Asia. The context of our discussion today is really that last week, on July 7th, the world crossed that grim milestone of 4 million deaths from COVID, which obviously is an underestimate. We know from history that no disease with a strong zoonotic component, either in origin or transmission, has ever disappeared completely. And we're also seeing that vaccine distribution is being outpaced by the virus. In fact, more than half the 4 million deaths have occurred this year. Economic recovery across the world, across the Asia Pacific, is uneven, and as we've all acknowledged, is highly conditional on the nature of the vaccine distribution. Now, we also know that the pandemic has accelerated certain shifts in terms of policy and development priorities, leading to the achievement of the SDGs in 2030. The importance of digitalization is being discussed. It's a very prominent issue. And we are also seeing a renewed call for a new mode of collaboration across nations. So the provisioning of global public goods, provisioning of regional public goods is again back on the agenda of development discussions. All these issues are what we will talk about today. And this builds on this partnership report that the UN ESCAP, the Asian Development Bank, and UNDP prepared a few weeks ago, the SDG Partnership Report, and with the same title, Leaving No Country Behind. And this is really what will frame our discussion going forward. So without further ado, let me invite Ms. Armida Alice-Jabana to make a presentation on the key messages from that report.
Thank you very much, Swarnim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for this very important discussion of opportunities for Asia and the Pacific to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. This topic was the theme of the joint ESCAP ADB UNDP 2021 report on progress towards the SDGs in our region. One thing is certain, however, the impacts of COVID-19 have differed across the region, reflecting differences in vulnerabilities. Some of the economic, social, and environmental consequences of COVID-19 will be permanent. Moreover, governments' responses have also differed widely, reflecting differences in capacities of countries. As a result, the pandemic has widened development gaps between countries to the extent that there is a significant risk of a K-shaped recovery, where some countries are likely to recover much faster than the others. The uneven rollout of vaccination against COVID-19 has been the latest and most visible facet of an unequal region. An uneven recovery would deepen inequality between countries, despite our imperative to leave no one behind. The failure to implement policies that address such concerns are likely to worsen pre-existing vulnerabilities and make societies more unequal and polarized. Yet the pandemic has also forced a range of innovations and forced institutions in our region to become more adaptive. Digitalization has provided opportunities and new solutions to development challenges, and the pandemic has sped up the uptake of digital technology. Technology has helped governments, businesses, and people manage their pandemic responses and cope with containment measures. The figure here shows how digital technology can serve as a tool in pandemic preparedness and response in ways that are difficult to achieve manually. Similarly, digital finance is an essential component of rebuilding and resilience. It is essential to build after the pandemic and increase levels of resilience. COVID-19 has demonstrated the transformative power of digital financing to meet development challenges. There are many examples how digital financial services and fintech can foster inclusive growth and resilience. However, there are risks and challenges. These relate to the digital divide. Uneven digitalization, therefore, brings the risk of undermining progress on SDGs. The quality and inclusiveness of the underlying digital system will largely determine whether we can avoid a K-shaped recovery. Better connectivity is one of the key drivers of digital transformation. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the interdependence of countries and the importance of cooperation for sustainable development. The Asia-Pacific region has a long and diverse experience with cooperation. Yet, despite the successes of many forms of our regional cooperation, the social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development have been much less prominent. To support recovery for SDGs, inclusive, environmentally sustainable, and resilient approaches to cooperation will be vital. Regional cooperation can be more effective if it focuses on people-centered development, and in the aftermath of pandemic, regional cooperation should support greater inclusion. As the pandemic has shown, the health of nature and the health of humans are interlinked. Regional cooperation should prioritize more ambitious climate action and environmental sustainability. The pandemic is an asymmetric shock. This could widen the gaps between countries. A major main concern is that the pandemic will reverse progress on poverty reduction and also lead to greater divergence and inequality. In the era of the pandemic, digitalization is one of the most powerful forces transforming societies and economies. However, digitalization is not a panacea, as it can widen gaps in socio-economic development. Regional cooperation is required to manage and mitigate growing divergence and create the foundation for inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development. The risks of an uneven recovery between countries are particularly high in the absence of concerted and collaborative policy actions. We need renewed regional cooperation with a focus on people and planet to create the foundation for inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development, ensure no country is left behind. Thank you.
I think you are mute, Mr. Weigel. I'm sorry, I missed what you said because you are mute, Mr. Weigel. You need to unmute first.
Sorry, over to you, Mr. Bambang Susantono.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Ibu Armida, Kenny, distinguished panelists and participants, a very good day to all of you from Manila, the Philippines. It is a great pleasure for me to join all of you on behalf of ADB, Asian Development Bank, on the discussion of how best to use our joint report, ADB, ESCAP, and UNDP, to ensure our recovery from the pandemic in the spirit of leaving no person or country behind. Without a doubt, the pandemic has tested our resilience. Everyone has worked hard to contain the spread of COVID-19. Today, governments, the private sector, international organizations, multilateral development banks like ADB, and other development partners are pooling our efforts to make vaccine available to all. It is a very prerequisite before we can concentrate on the pandemic recovery and meeting the SDG targets. As I have continuously advocated over the past months, let us take this time to make bold choices that will set us on a path to a green, resilient, and inclusive recovery. As we all know, the SDG were designed to address the very gaps and fragilities the pandemic exposed. And while the future may look uncertain, the pandemic also hit a fast-forward button on several critically important enablers for countries to meet the SDG targets. One of the most important enablers may be just the accelerations of digital transformations, as has been also explained by Ibu Armida before. The use of digitalizations in responding to restrictions on mobility or personal contact over the past year and a half has been extraordinary. Digital technology helped us monitor COVID-19. It allowed us also to better test and trace infections. Telemedicine, for example, became a virtual solution to some of our urgent health and well-being problems. The digital technology continues to sustain the education of millions who were suddenly deprived of in-person learning. Businesses were forced to move online, expanding e-commerce from marketing to logistics to delivery, and digital payments have skyrocketed. Financial technology is helping small and medium enterprises sustain and stimulate their businesses. And we saw how it helps deliver assistance to the poor and also the vulnerable. The digital technology also holds the promise of helping us develop smarter and more efficient low-carbon solutions to our infrastructure needs in supplying energy, transport, and water, among other critical services. Digitalization can also play a critical role in sharing strategies to build resilience against future crises. This is all good, and luckily, technological advancement has in many ways prepared us to better respond to the pandemic. But fully harnessing the benefit of digital transformations demands that we narrow or better remove the digital divide within and between countries. The poor and most vulnerable across our region have had no access to the digital lifelines in weathering the effects of the pandemic. Women and girls, the elderly, and those living in remote areas are particularly held back. So at ADB, we are working hard to close these gaps. Regional cooperation will play a critical role in making the digital transformation more equitable. These cooperations help countries share assets and infrastructure needed to connect. It can also establish common standards and ensure that systems can operate seamlessly. So let me close by saying, if the past year has taught us anything, it is that countries will be better placed to deal with and recover from shocks if we are closer to achieving the SDG. I look forward to hearing more, especially from those at the forefront of these efforts, about the innovations we can pursue to get us closer to our SDG targets. Thank you very much. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bambang Susantono, for that forceful assessment of the state of digitalization, also a renewed call for regional cooperation in the Asia Pacific. Let me now invite Ms. Kandi Wignaraja, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and the head of the UNDP Regional Bureau for the Asia and the Pacific. Over to you.
Thank you, Swarnim. And really, what a pleasure to be here with colleagues also from ADB and ESCAP, and really good to hear from Armida and Bambang. I want us to consider a single piece of evidence. Last year, for the first time in the Earth's 4.5 billion year history, the weight of human-made materials exceeded that of all life on Earth. Now, our scientists have been speaking to this burden and to pandemics that will be endemic. And we are there now. The COVID-19 vaccine nationalism is sadly a manifestation of the maladies or the mixed maladies that are upon us. New pandemics we know will emerge so long as planetary and social imbalances keep reinforcing each other. It means the current crisis extends and there will be future ones. However, there is light at the end of this tunnel if we only had the courage to get there. Economic growth we know can happen through more measured, just and sustainable means without this rush to exploit. UNDP has argued for this through its human development approach for 3 decades now, with an index that is now planetary adjusted. So there are means to change both approach and metrics. Our joint report from ESCAP, ADB, and UNDP advances the need for bold domestic policies and for greater global and regional cooperation. And as Ibu Armida and Bang Mang have said, particularly in areas of digital connectivity, investment in human well-being, and in development finance. So I'm going to point to 3 messages with a different emphasis. First, we must change direction on the under-provisioning of global and regional public goods, like access to the COVID vaccine or to digital connectivity. As my colleagues have said, digital access is emerging as a new frontier of augmented human capabilities. Where the provisioning works, it allows people to connect to health services, ensure access to basic income, finance for enterprises, and children continue to learn. But often it does not happen. Then pre-existing digital divides between countries and groups of people just grow deeper. These are inconvenient truths. The provisioning of public goods can be done in ways that protect the larger numbers. And for those of you who remember, this is how we address smallpox. So it can and it must be done. A second different emphasis is to intentionally move responses away from discrete siloed approaches to trust in the more interconnected and cross-sector. Hence, to work across institutions to problem solve. Now, this is tough to do as it is not how we are set up or trained to think and act. For example, countries and communities that are moving faster out of high-polluting fossil fuels, that have introduced a decent minimum income, that have extended health services and insurance coverage for their people, that are educating their women and girls, and protecting their forests, rivers, and reefs, they have multiple institutions working together on these issues. We see it happening mostly at subnational levels. The national and the global still has much to learn to break out of vertical constraints. And third, we looked at differences in governance systems as to what worked in more agile and anticipatory ways. It is strange that almost 80% of people concur that it is important to protect the planet, but only half say they are likely to take concrete actions to save it. So there is a gap between what people value and want and what they feel responsible for and will act on. Now, to close the gap between these socially desirable values and individual actions, it takes governance institutions, formal and informal, that can anticipate and deliver on policies that incentivize us all to act differently. So what we tax, what we subsidize, what we value as leaders, as societies, it matters and helps change behavior. Such systems also work best where there is greater trust between people and their public and private institutions. I conclude with a perplexing thought. Why were we not able to contain this coronavirus as it escaped national boundaries? It bounded across Asia and then jumped across regions. Were we caught napping? Were our regional, national, global institutions not ready? We need enhanced multilateral and regional cooperation to act faster and protect against such transboundary threats. Now, this pandemic is a once-in-a-century occurrence, hidden inside a once-in-an-epoch planetary staging event as we exit the Holocene and enter the Anthropocene. The science is with us, so are the means through policy, capability, money, and technology. However, we know it will take an amazing group of leaders with a vision beyond their own terms in office, be it in state, industry, multilateral entities, and civil society, to bring it all together in a system reboot that rebuilds differently. Thank you. Back to you, Swarnim.
Thank you very much, Kani, for raising some of those big issues in governance, emphasizing also the issues of the under-provisioning of global and regional public goods, and calling for an interconnected and integrated approach to development policy making. Now, let me invite Ms. Tina Zabin from Startup Bangladesh to talk about some of the experiences in the country and what lessons might there be for the region at large on the agenda of digitalization, a theme that the report covers in detail. Over to you, Ms. Zabin.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank ESCAP for inviting me to this session, and my deepest gratitude and greetings from Startup Bangladesh Limited, the first and only venture capital fund wholly funded by the government of Bangladesh, dignitaries from UNDP, ESCAP, and all the audience who are listening to us live. For Bangladesh, you know, the COVID story has been, of course, as usual with many other countries, it has been very challenging. But at the same time, you know, we have seen that digitization and technology played a huge role in managing the COVID crisis in the business area and also in the health sector pretty well. As you know that Bangladesh has shown a positive growth during COVID and among two other South Asian countries, so which is actually pretty good. For the startup sector, it's been it has been challenging in the beginning of the COVID crisis, but what we have seen is that e-commerce has become a big player in managing COVID. In fact, COVID has been a boon. It has driven the e-commerce industry many folds. So when it comes to e-commerce, you know, obviously for a country like Bangladesh, it has onboarded lots of hundreds of thousands of you know, SMEs who started their business in F-commerce basically. And one of our speaker earlier said that, you know, e-commerce and digitization has become a big tool in running the business and healthcare and things like that. Same story in Bangladesh. What happened is during this crisis last year in ICT Ministry, we commissioned a study for it's called Post-COVID Roadmap. And we wanted to understand, you know, what type of new market is going to open up, or what type of market, you know, is going to kind of wrap up, and accordingly, you know, we would do our ICT policy for 2021. So what really the findings that came about is we needed to make sure that, you know, there is digital literacy and also access to digital tools. One of our earlier speaker mentioned that, you know, there needs to be access to these technology, not just, you know, for the urban population, but, you know, it needs to be very inclusive. Fintech, MFS platforms have become very, very active. We also needed to, one of the finding is that, universal access to the digital bandwidth and healthcare system and such, things like that. So a couple of things that came out from this study is that, definitely we need to make sure that our startup ecosystem, which is still at a very kind of a nascent stage in Bangladesh, but we needed to make sure that, we support it properly. So as a result, we have launched Startup Bangladesh Limited, which is, as I said, is the first venture capital fund, fully funded by the government of Bangladesh. And one of our goal is to fund these from early stage to, growth stage startups. And in this funding process, we need to make sure that we are using gender lens. So you'll be very happy to know that, we have made 7 investments already. And these are in e-commerce and also education technology, health tech specifically in mental well-being, because that has been a big issue during COVID. So we needed to make sure that, we are also supporting platforms who are taking care of, this new surge of all kinds of issues in mental well-being. So we also have that. And during this process, we made sure that we have a good gender representations in the founders of the startup. We are looking forward to invest in 43 more startups. 2021 is a very special year for Bangladesh. We are celebrating the 50th golden anniversary of the independence of the country. And also we are celebrating the birth centennial of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So we are celebrating, commemorating this with investing in 50 startups and investing 100 crore BDT. What also came about is, our National Perspective Plan, Vision 2041, and with the focus on, good governance, democratization of technology, so that, nobody is left behind. So our focus is not just in, urban population, but also making sure that each of the villages becomes kind of a smart city. So it has all the facilities and the benefits of, a modern city. We are also focusing on capacity building, and that means, not just capacity in just regular education, but also making sure that, from the primary education level, the students are learning like coding and also learning the basics of entrepreneurship, as Bangladesh is one of the youngest countries in the world. So overall, COVID has definitely challenged us with in many areas, in health sector, in business sectors, but in general, now that we are 1 year seasoned with COVID, we have developed, the logistics and the back linkage of the supply chain using technology and supporting our startups so that we can, address the challenges. A very quick data point I want to share about our startup ecosystem is, during in the beginning of the COVID, our e-commerce site or industry was, pretty small, not very significant. But during COVID, the business have increased almost 70 to 80%. And it has brought together, hundreds of thousands of SMEs, micro merchants who are using now fintech platforms. So we kind of leapfrogged into, digitization, and which is a very, very positive news. We have generated, the startup ecosystem generated almost 1.5 million jobs, brought in almost just in the last few months, $40-some million to startups who are working in agri-tech and working in digital supply chain, working in women empowerment type of platforms. So overall, our approach is that we want to collaborate with our regional partners and learn from their learnings from COVID, and also we want to share our learnings. I would like to thank you again for inviting us. And with that, I would like to hear, from all our esteemed speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tina Javin, for bringing to us vividly the thriving, the startup initiatives that are ongoing in Bangladesh. And I think there are lots of lessons there for countries in the region, especially the LDCs, the least developed countries, of which Bangladesh is a very important member, set to graduate soon and all that. So thank you for that presentation. Let me now invite Ms. Jyotsana Mohan for a civil society perspective on some of the issues that we've heard about today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swarnim Wagle. Thank you, ESCAP, for inviting us for this August gathering. My hello to all of you. My name is Jyotsana, for a civil society platform. It's called Asia Development Alliance, and we are membership-based organization, having membership in about 24 countries in all over Asia. Here I am to speak about the regional disparity in the in terms of the digital technologies that we have in Asia. And we have seen, even before the pandemic, we saw how the Asian and Pacific region had witnessed worsening inequalities, unprecedented levels of corporate culture, increasing threats of climate crises, and continuing of external society. We have also witnessed how the digital technologies were used innovatively in the pandemic management and emergency relief, and help provide essential health services, education of millions of children, and bring social protection to vulnerable communities. But there is a digital divide that we also heard from Admida and all the other previous speakers within the country and across the countries, across various population groups, and by gender, and by different groups and communities. We have seen that how different countries like Myanmar, Indonesia, Cambodia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, etc. Are justifying internet censorship, during the time of pandemic, using digital state surveillances under the guise of cyber sovereignty. So the potential for the expansion for the Big Brother syndrome, especially the context of COVID-19, is raising concerns about the civic cooperation with a new digital twist. Later, we saw how the global crises, where the aspiration to bring back the technology fixes or silver bullets often mutes the quest for long-term solution to address the root causes and structural problems that led to the crises. For example, the aggressive approach, especially for example by the countries of like South Korea, Singapore, China, who used to contain the pandemic, that focus on widespread testing and massive contact tracing, have become a model for other regions. Such as approaches, they are wrongly reduced to mere technological intervention, losing sight of other factors that enable the government to respond swiftly and decisively to the pandemic. This includes the presence of a robust biomedical industry made up of small companies run by scientists that has built-in capacity to produce and deploy effective and affordable test kits, existing universal healthcare and public health system, as well as civil society's critical role in reaching vulnerable groups in moderating and policy advocacy work on the appropriate balance between protecting the public and respect the basic human rights. So without appropriate measures in place, technologies measured adopted by these countries in using digital technologies to track, trace COVID-19 infected and recovered patients as aspired by other countries in the region may be misused to further suppress democratic rights, inspiring on democratic rights impinges on privacy and institutionalized state surveillances. So technology companies have started to position their digital technologies to enable digital tracking and identification to be embedded in the aftermath of the pandemic. So without societal oversight, digitalization of information on public health and pandemic could make this public good inaccessible to people, concentrated in the hands of few countries and controlled by the giant corporates, especially when we see this kind of inequality within Asia. We have also seen in case of education how the digital infrastructure is where more than 100 private schools have been put up for a sale due to the non-payment of fees. The UN says, 147 million children are unable to access education online through remote learning. And then again, we see in India where 24% of the households have access to the internet according to 2019 government survey. So it's only 24 to 25% of total population when they have the only digital infrastructure. Then it's very having a complete digital network, in these countries. So similarly, we saw access to computer and only 12% can afford online coaching classes or online classes. So basically, we have seen how the education system has been greatly impacted with the closure of school, resulting in disruption of learning, dismissal of children, teachers, as well as intensified digital, rural, urban, and gender divide. In addition, the teachers have also been exposed to tremendous stress to adapt to new platform, teaching methods, and workloads to ensure that students are not lagging. Another worrying trend is that it being reported that the contract teachers, they have been suspended. Life will not be the same after this pandemic, and business as usual may not be sufficient for this new world order. So we need to address not only the educational issues, but all the other issues in the comprehensive way, once including health, economy, environment as correlated factors. So there are some recommendation that I would just like to give on behalf of our organization, on behalf of Asia Pacific Civil Society, and they are like addressing the digital divide and providing access to technology in an equitable manner so that learning outcomes are not further damaged, as this is path for the future. Investing to these facilities, not just for the pandemic, can enable a more sustainable recovery. Community-based and gender-responsive technologies and innovation address root causes of development crises and emerging challenges such as COVID-19 are the key elements to transform pathways. And the UN must take the lead in laying down basic principles to provide people's right in technological measures that aim to address the pandemic, tackling its structural root. And there's a role of a huge role of regional. So recommending that regularizing the access of which is not being functional for past few years, and then strengthen already the regional institutions like ASEAN and cooperation to ensure seamless and secure cross-border data flow, which will be key to ensure interpermeability of systems and enabling digital finance for all. Stepped up regional integration through digital system can help ensure no countries left behind in an increasingly connected world in this digitalization transfer into the greater resilience. In addition, digital cooperation must support countries to build greater resilience. These measures will be vital to mitigate the threats of the K-shaped economic recovery and prepare countries to deal with the future stocks. This is all for now. If you have any question, feel free to answer. Ask me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jyotsana Mohan. I think you spoke to the theme of leaving no one behind quite eloquently, and I think that brings us now to the question and answer sessions. Let me just cluster some of the issues that we're seeing on YouTube and other forums that are being directed at this panel. Let me actually start with the issue of leaving no country behind, which is the theme of the report, also leaving no one behind. And there's a question A couple of questions directed at the UN Under-Secretary General and the Assistant Secretary General on how is it possible to leave no country behind when there is still lack of medical supplies in some LDCs. So this is coming in from the perspective of low-income countries in the region, the uneven recovery that we're seeing. How is the UN system helping to recover from COVID-19? So maybe I can start with Ms. Armida, if you can take some questions, some of those, speaking generally on the themes. Basically, if we're making the case for leaving no country behind, what are some of those sequential sort of steps that we're putting in place as a UN system to address that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Swarnim, and also to the viewers that has posed the question. Again, let me, or may I respond by also referring to our commission session. We had our annual commission session last April, in which a member state endorsed a resolution which basically asked the Secretariat and also the UN system on how to support countries, member states, to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19, the socio-economic impact, as well as to recover better together, including how for the countries to better prepare for future crises and pandemics. And two strands of issues that came out quite strongly, from statement of leaders as well as statement by the delegation, in essence, two strands. One is the health-related aspect or issues, issues such as vaccine procurement, vaccine production, therapeutics and medicines, as well as the strengthening of the healthcare system, including universal health coverage, and link that to the social protection system. And the second strand is how to recover better together, including, the ideas such as green recovery, and of course, in the broader framework of sustainable development, in which the several strands within that context, including the relationship between human nature, which, apparently caused this problem. So basically these two strands. And how the UN systems, not only ESCAP, how the UN systems is coordinating or working together. And we have, out of this reform, the UNDS reform, including at the regional level, in which UN system comes together. Let me take the one example in the health-related strand, in which a member state endorse in the scaling up the social protection within that context, including the strengthening of the healthcare system. So in this case, of course, we have not only ESCAP, we have UNDP, we have ILO, UNICEF, and many colleagues. So the regional framework, the regional action plan, ESCAP coordinates and member state endorse. Already we have a regional action plan to scale up social protection. But when it comes to the country level support, colleagues from UNDP, from ILO that have country presence are in a much better position to provide that support. So therefore, we work together. But now it's not only social protection, but very much the healthcare, the scaling up of or the strengthening of healthcare system, and including this is the more difficult one, because this is already being coordinated at the global level and quite challenges. The vaccine therapeutics, in which we have, COVAX facility, ACT accelerators, and so on. So I think there is room, at the regional level, if we could harness cooperation among countries. Doesn't have to be the whole Asia Pacific, but among few countries within our region, and including together with ADB. ADB already has, some provision, some mechanism on that. But again, if we look forward, this is not only now, the procurement of vaccine now, but also the R&D, the production, the decentralization, the hubs, and so on and so forth. So therefore, we can, or the support, yeah, to the targeted countries you asked earlier, LDCs and so on, then it can be provided in a more effective, efficient manner. But this is, of course, going forward, yeah, and now is a more immediate. Yeah, of course, certain agencies that are in a better position will be able to provide the more immediate needs.
Right. Thank you so much.
So basically, thank you very much.
Let me now turn to Ms. Kani Wignaraja. Maybe you could pick up some of these themes, but also add perhaps, we've seen the pandemic experience accelerating the agenda of universal digitalization, really bringing it to the frontier of development practice. Are there examples from UNDP's own work on how this is being leveraged to address some of the challenges, especially access to COVID-19 vaccines? So over to you, Kani.
Thanks, Swarnim. Maybe let me lead in with the vaccine issue, because I think that is front and center. And maybe 3 or 4 points on that. First, we've realized how key it is to be able to protect the supply chain for vaccine production, because in our region, we were very reliant on centers that particularly in India, and in China, to both produce the vaccine and be able to distribute it. And when those supply chains break, then the whole region, let alone other regions, really saw the disruption. So I think the ability on certain things that are almost akin to national, regional, and global security, like being able to continue production of vaccines, need to be looked at not just per country, but as a global security issue. The next is in terms of getting the vaccines to low-income countries and also being able to get it into arms of low-income communities. Here, the work led by ministries of health, but with WHO, UNICEF, UNDP, setting up those systems, tracking systems, supply chain management, increasing the capabilities of health workers end to end has been critical. And here, if I look at the work we've done in Indonesia, in India, this has been absolutely essential, so that when national leadership gives the green light, there is a system that picks it up, led by national health systems. Now, in our region, we've seen countries that have had stronger, robust primary healthcare systems have done better. But let me close with a different anecdote, which is the country that has one of the highest rates of vaccine coverage is Bhutan in our region. And that goes to a national leadership, people that trust their leadership and their national institutions, having the right data at the right time, so knowing vulnerabilities and where to get the vaccines out there. This all worked. Now, we've all talked to broken cooperation, but here's where cooperation worked, because to get the second shot to Bhutan that had 70% coverage on the first shot, it took global and regional cooperation. Countries came together to support Bhutan get their second dose of the vaccine. So when a country does the right thing and their leaders do the right thing, it seems the rest of the world is incentivized to also support and get behind that possibility. And this is where I think for agencies like UNDP, it has been critical to be there to support these countries, make it happen. Back to you.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of questions I see on YouTube on the vaccine inequity issue. And so I think that's been covered. Let me now turn to Mr. Bambang Susuntoto. You can pick up on some of the themes, but also may I ask you to come in on the issue of regional cooperation. There's an interesting question here, which basically asks, how come we've worked quite effectively on the economic sector in the regional area, free trade agreements, investment treaties, lots of cooperation in the region, but we lag behind on the environmental sector. So why is that? Why do we lag behind? Why are not regional cooperation modalities enforced effectively in the environmental sector? So feel free to pick up on some of the themes that we discussed, but also perhaps you could pivot to this larger issue of regional cooperation. Over to you.
Thank you, Swarmin. I just want to supplement both colleague Kenny and also Ibu Armida on the situation right now that dictate us to work together. It's a multi-pronged approach. It's a global, regional, and local level that we have to strengthen among ourselves. And we know that we are in the situation where no one is safe until everyone is safe at this pandemic level. So for that, for example, just to give you some sense that the ADB announced our COVID-19 assistance package about 20 billion in April 2022, in April 2020, providing support for emergency response to immediate health crisis at the time, substantial and quick budget support for our DMCs for the counter-cyclical program, for example, and also for things like significant expansion in trade and supply chain finance and array of tailored knowledge solutions that in particular to deal with the pandemic at the time. And last year, before we closed the year in December 2020, we also announced our what we call the FVAX, the Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility. It's a 9 billion support, and this is to ensure equitable access to safe and effective vaccines for our developing member countries. So you see that there is a development partnership between us and also UN system, for example, and other international organization in helping and assisting we call it the developing member countries in Asia Pacific to deal with this unprecedented situation where the economic and the health is really what we call the pandeminomics, the economic that being affected by the pandemic. And I think in this situation also we should not lose sight of those that are immediately needed by us to really recover ourselves, but also thinking along the way on the more strategic things to include also issues such as the one that you mentioned, Swarmin, on the environment. Climate change, for example, right? That is one area that we should also embed it into our Build Back Better program so that in our very limited scarcity of resources, we still be able to expand or to use our $1 to have a multiple targets of SDGs as far as possible. Because again, the scarcity of financing that we have, we should strengthen our governance, that also being mentioned by Ibu Armida and Kenny. And for that, accountability, transparency, and partnership does matters. And for that, we should be able to also build back better in a way that we would like to embed all the environment, climate change, all those issues that we have to tackle after the pandemic going down in the future. I stop there.
Thank you so much for highlighting the pandenomics as well as the environmental issues. May I invite our discussants if they want to come in with a minute or two of response to what they have heard. So maybe Ms. Tina Zabin, would you want to come in?
Thank you so much.
Just briefly.
Sure. The pandemic actually locally, what we have learned is that digitization is very, very important and collaboration is extremely important. There are two things that came out from this whole pandemic situation, especially from the ICT division. We have come up with our own solution to track and monitor the spread of the pandemic. And also we have, the vaccination. So it's the Shuraka platform. And additionally, our government agencies, they have been working during the pandemic using, online and virtual. And this has, it's kind of a leapfrogged, even the government system. And we came up with our own virtual platform. It's called Boitok. So what we have learned is that, although we were not ready when the pandemic started, but we kind of leapfrogged almost 5 to 10 years in some areas. Of course, vaccination and access to vaccines is very important. And we do expect that regionally we can come together and we can make sure that vaccines are available for all countries, not just the developed nations. Thank you.
Maybe a minute of inputs from Ms. Jyotsana Mohan, if you want to come in.
Thank you, Mr. Wagle. Yes, we have seen that there is at the global level there are the issues of vaccine cut from the global north to south, but we are also thinking about how can we encourage South-South cooperation. We heard from our previous leader speak about India and China. There was good hope, but then India grappled with its own issues of pandemic in last few months. I think it's also important to look at the triangular cooperation. If there are countries like China, India, they produce more vaccine, but then we also think about getting some assistance from the global north. We know that there are additional vaccines available with the European countries, with the USA. So why not sharing this vaccine? And also the issues of patent. I mean, there is a need to remove the patent. That's what we as a civil society are also demanding. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are now at the end of this program. We have to wrap up in about a few minutes. So let me end with a few concluding thoughts. There's a lot of issues that were raised today, and drawing on the report, but also going much broader and beyond. We at UNDP have been trying to grapple conceptually with many of these issues that the distinguished panel raised. And we've sort of grouped these into three buckets, if you like, right? The first is on acceleration, the issues that the pandemic is likely to shift, accelerate, digitalization, we talked about it at length, the production paradigms, global value chains, the issue around climate finance, how do we deal with the green recovery? So these are all issues that we'd like to see will be accelerated. The second set of issues is around accentuation. This is about human conditions, multidimensional poverty, human security, equality, inequalities. All these issues have also become very prominent in the course of the pandemic. I just saw a very interesting question coming in on the chat. For example, I think Jyotsana highlighted the learning crisis. A lot of attrition, the education sector suffering in a very serious manner. How can we ensure learning continuity for all when there's been an increase in the privatization of education or the corporate capture of online learning? So these are new issues coming up. As digitalization opens up opportunities, there are also these issues from before the pandemic that remain on the table. So how do we take it forward is a very important challenge for all of us. And finally, everything boils down to the challenge of governance, right? At the national level, regional level, and at the global level. We call this adjustment, how we all come together to respond better to many of these things in terms of new policies, new incentives, etc. But there are some hopeful signs of performance across countries in terms of pandemic response, even at comparable levels of income. So there's something more than capacity. Perhaps there's this distinction to be made between capacity and capabilities, how you deploy those built capacities to save lives and to uplift livelihoods and all that. And regional cooperation, we've talked about it at length, but ultimately a lot of these issues also speak to the importance of better global governance, especially in the provisioning of global public goods. So with those thoughts, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists, and I'm very pleased at the enthusiastic participation of our colleagues in this forum on YouTube and elsewhere. And we will obviously be sharing the recorded video of this session. And I'd like to thank all the organizers, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific, the Asian Development Bank, and the United Nations Development Program for making this side event possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, Bu Armida. Bye, Kenny.
Bye,
Thank you,
guys.
Sarmin,
Thank you.
again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.